In the heart of a storm-ravaged town, where the rain hadn't stopped in 3 days, turning the streets of Willow Bend into rivers and the fields into swamps, Anna Graceland clutched her shawl tight around her shoulders. The church bell rang once, then fell silent beneath the roar of the storm. Her train had arrived 2 days late, and the man she was supposed to marry, Grant Ellis, a rancher with land and livestock, was nowhere to be found. She'd asked every person in the depot. She'd checked the post office for a reply. All she had was a mud-streaked trunk, a soaked dress clinging to her legs, and a soaked piece of parchment with his name on it. Grant Ellis, cabin past the South Creek. But the South Creek had vanished, swallowed by the flood. The water had taken everything, including the bridge, including the road she'd followed, what she thought was the path past split fences and floating barrels, only to find the place she was promised swept away. There was no cabin, just debris, cracked beams tangled in uprooted trees and broken pieces of a life that was supposed to be hers. She collapsed to her knees in the mud, rain pouring down her back, hands trembling as her wedding gloves sank into the earth. Her last meal had been 2 days ago. Her feet bled from walking too far in boots too small. And worst of all, nobody cared. The town was too busy boarding windows and burying losses to bother with a mail-order bride left without a groom, until the sound of hooves cut through the storm. Anna turned slowly, unsure if it was real or just her imagination playing cruel tricks. But the man who rode up wasn't a mirage. He was soaked through like her, a long rifle strapped to his saddle, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over a face half hidden by a ragged scar that ran from temple to jaw. He didn't speak when he saw her. He just stared. His horse shifted beneath him, anxious from the wind, but he didn't move. Anna stood slowly, wobbling from hunger, hair stuck to her cheeks. "Are you Grant Ellis?" she asked, her voice small. He shook his head once. "No." "Then why are you here?" she whispered. He stared a moment longer, then dismounted in one smooth motion, stepped through the mud, and without a word, lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing. "Because I buried 3 women yesterday," he said quietly. "You're not going to be the 4th." Then he turned towards the storm, carrying her like a ghost clinging to breath, and hoisted her onto his horse. The horse moved steadily through the flood-stained trees, hooves sloshing through shallow currents and slick mud, while Anna clung to the saddle horn, her fingers raw and stiff from cold. The ranger rode behind her, one arm braced firmly around her waist, the other gripping the reins with unshakable control. He hadn't said another word since he'd lifted her from the mud. No questions, no comfort, just silent, efficient motion through a world that felt like it had already drowned. His coat was heavy wool, frayed at the cuffs and soaked clean through, but he'd wrapped it around her shoulders without hesitation. The scent of leather and smoke clung to it, and to him. Every breath she took was filled with the quiet thunder of him, strong, scarred, and still. The landscape blurred with exhaustion, trees giving way to rock, then to open hill, until the slope narrowed and a dark outline appeared through the mist. A shack, stone and timber, tucked against a ridge with a tin roof that groaned in the wind. He swung down first, then reached up and lifted her like she was glass. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched the ground, and he caught her with ease, holding her upright as if her weight meant nothing. "You live here?" she asked, her voice small. He nodded once and guided her inside. The place was sparse. 1 cot, a stove, a chair, a rifle leaning against the corner. He moved like he'd done this 100 times, lighting a fire, throwing dry logs on the flames, setting water to boil. She stood in the doorway, dripping, shivering, afraid to speak. "Sit," he said finally, his voice deep and rough like stone grinding against stone. She obeyed, her knees trembling as she sank onto the cot. The heat from the growing fire stung her frozen skin. "What's your name?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just stirred the fire. "Colt," he muttered. "Colt Bennett," she repeated softly, as if testing it for weight. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett." He didn't look at her. "Don't thank me yet." Then he knelt beside a chest, pulled out a blanket, and set it gently over her lap. "You married?" he asked suddenly. She shook her head. "I was supposed to be, but he never showed." "Then he's either dead or a coward," Colt said flatly. "Either way, you're better off." Anna blinked, unsure whether to cry or laugh. "And what about you?" she asked. "Are you married?" He paused, staring into the fire. "Not anymore." The silence that followed said more than words ever could. Anna watched him, this man who had pulled her from the storm without a reason, who asked for nothing and offered everything. And in the warmth of that fire, with mud still drying on her, dress and grief still heavy on her heart, she realized something terrifying. She already trusted him. By morning, the rain had thinned into mist, but the cabin walls still groaned like they carried too much memory. Anna woke wrapped in a wool blanket on the cot, the fire still smoldering, and her wet dress now hanging over a line Colt had rigged, across the hearth. Her feet throbbed, her belly ached from emptiness, but the strangest feeling of all was safety. She'd forgotten what that felt like. Colt sat by the door, sharpening a knife, his face unreadable in the low light. He didn't glance up when she stirred, just said, "There's coffee on the stove. Strong and bitter, like everything worth drinking." She pushed herself upright slowly, muscles stiff, and managed a faint smile. "I'll take bitter over drowned." He poured her a tin cup and handed it over without ceremony. Their fingers brushed, and for just a second, his hand hovered there, like maybe he'd forgotten what warmth felt like too. She sipped the coffee, grimaced at the taste, and said, "Are you a ranger?" He nodded. "Used to be. Left after the river. Gulch ambush. Nobody left to fight for after that." His eyes flicked towards the window as if ghosts waited outside. "They call me when they're desperate. I don't ride for anyone else now." "Why help me?" she asked. "I wasn't on a wanted poster." Colt's jaw worked for a moment before he said, "Because when you looked up at me in the mud, you didn't beg. You didn't cry. You just asked if I was the man you were supposed to marry." He met her eyes for the first time. "I've never seen anyone look more alone." Anna swallowed hard. She wasn't used to kindness without motive, not from strangers, not from men. "This isn't your burden," she said quietly. "You could have just left me." "Yeah," he said. "I did. I've left people before, buried enough regrets to know which ones rock slowest." He stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a can of beans and stale bread. "It ain't much, but it'll hold us until the water drops. Then you can decide where you want to go." Anna looked around. The cabin was small, barely meant for one, but she wasn't ready to leave it. Not yet. Not him. "What if I don't have anywhere to go?" Colt glanced at her, then back at the pan. "Then we'll figure it out," he said, like a man who didn't believe in promises but kept them anyway. Anna wrapped the blanket tighter around her and watched him cook. The scars on his knuckles caught the firelight. Maybe the cabin hadn't been built for two, but fate didn't always ask permission before moving in. The flood had receded just enough to reveal the bones of the town, broken carts, shattered fences, and uprooted trees tangled like corpses in the dirt. Colt took Anna out walking that morning, not because he said she needed the air, but because he knew what she didn't want to say out loud. She needed to see it for herself. They moved slowly, her feet still tender, Colt matching her pace with quiet patience. The wind whispered through broken window frames and snapped laundry lines, and the stench of rot clung low to the ground. When they passed the place where the depot once stood, Anna stopped short. All that remained was the iron frame and a toppled sign crushed into the mud. Her name had once been written on a crate beside it. Anna Graceland, bride for Grant Ellis. Now it was just another soggy corner of memory. She didn't ask for it. "Supposed to start a life here," she said, her voice brittle. "A fresh one. Instead, I buried a dream and wore a lie down to the bone." Colt didn't speak. He just stood there beside her, hat pulled low, one hand resting loosely on the knife at his belt, like it anchored him. "What happened to the women you buried?" she asked. "You said 3. His eyes flicked toward the horizon. "A mother and 2 daughters, drowned trying to get to higher ground. By the time I found them..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. "Did they have anyone left?" she asked. "They do now," he said simply. "Up there." He nodded towards the ridge. "I carved a resting place where the water won't touch them again." Anna's chest tightened. This man, who barely spoke and carried more ghosts than supplies, had buried strangers with reverence, and now he walked beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world to carry another soul through wreckage. "You said people call. You when they're desperate," she said as they approached the cabin again. "Well, I think I might qualify." "You're not desperate," he said. "You're just not done yet." She turned to him, confused. "Not done with what?" "Choosing who you are now that everything you planned is gone." He opened the cabin door for her, then added, "You don't have to rush, but when you do decide, don't let grief be the one to choose." Inside, the fire waited like a quiet welcome. Anna stepped in, the weight of soaked dreams slowly shedding at the threshold. Maybe she hadn't found a husband, but she'd found something steadier, someone who didn't offer promises, just presence. And in a world washed to the bone, that might be the truest foundation. That night, the wind returned. Not with rain, but with a bone-deep cold that rattled the shutters and moaned through the chimney like some forgotten soul begging for warmth. Inside the cabin, the fire blazed steady, fed by Colt's careful tending. Anna sat in his oversized shirt, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows, her dress still damp and draped over a chair near the hearth. She hadn't said much since their return, and neither had he. But silence between them no longer felt like absence. It felt like understanding. Colt sat near the door, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements. His face was unreadable as always, but every so often, Anna caught him watching her. Not the way men in town had watched her, like something to possess, but like someone trying to remember the shape of hope. She stirred the stew pot gently and said, "You ever think about leaving these hills?" He didn't look up. "Left once. Came back different. The world out there talks too much and listens too little." She smiled faintly. "And what about me? Do I talk too much?" "You talk just enough to remind me I'm not alone." The words came out rough, unpolished, like they'd scraped their way from a place deep inside. Anna's hand paused on the wooden spoon. The fire cracked and a log shifted, sending sparks up the chimney. "You remind me too," she whispered. He finally set the rifle down and leaned back in the chair, his long legs stretching toward the fire. "You could still go," he said. "When the river clears and the roads dry up, there's a coach to Pine Hollow every fortnight. I'll take you there myself." "And if I don't want to go?" she asked. He met her eyes, and in that moment, all the guarded. Steel in his gaze melted into something far more dangerous, tenderness. "Then I'll stop pretending I don't want you to stay." Her breath caught. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls tighter, the heat not just from the fire. "You barely know me," she said. "I know how you hold silence like it's armor. I know how you stayed kind when life wasn't. And I know you brought light into a cabin built for ghosts." Anna stepped closer, the hem of the borrowed shirt brushing her knees. Then you know more than any man ever tried to. He rose slowly, closing the space between them one step at a time. When he stood in front of her, he reached out, not to grab, not to take, but to gently tuck a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't need a wedding paper to know what's mine to protect," he said. And for the first time since stepping off that train, Anna felt like maybe this was what she was meant to find all along, not a groom, but a place where love didn't speak loud. It simply stayed. It started with the sound of hooves, faint, deliberate, and too many to mistake for strays. Anna was gathering kindling near the cabin edge when she heard it. She froze, her heart tightening, eyes darting toward the ridge where mist still clung to the trees like old breath. By the time Colt stepped out from the barn, rifle already in hand, the riders were visible. 5 men on horseback wearing dust-stained hats and spurs that jingled with each motion. One carried a badge, another wore the slick grin of a man used to getting answers without asking questions kindly. Anna stood tall, though her hands trembled. Colt didn't step in front of her, but beside her. "Morning, Ranger," the lead man called out. Colt said nothing, just stood still, eyes like ice, fingers loose but ready. "We're looking for a woman," the man continued. "Mail-order bride, real pretty, arrived about the same time the flood hit. Her groom, Grant Ellis, is dead. Shot. Took a horse that didn't belong to him and wound up gut-shot in a saloon brawl 2 counties east." Anna's breath caught. A storm of feelings she didn't know how to name crashed inside her. Word is, she never made it to the wedding. That she's wandering around out here. Maybe doesn't even know what happened. The man leaned forward in his saddle. "That you, miss?" Anna didn't answer. Colt did. "She's not yours to take," he said evenly. The man raised a brow. "Didn't say she was. But if she's got no papers and if her man's dead, she's got no claim to land or protection. That makes her vulnerable." "She's not vulnerable," Colt said, his voice hardening. "She's with me." There was silence, thick and heavy. One of the riders shifted uneasily. The badge-wearer spat. "You claiming her?" he asked, eyes narrowing. "I'm saying you ride down this ridge without her name ever leaving your lips again." The men hesitated. They looked at Colt, at the rifle, at the quiet fury humming beneath his calm. Then slowly, grudgingly, they turned. The lead man tipped his hat with a smirk. "Storm will wash this all out eventually." "So will memory," Colt said. When they were gone, Anna exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Colt didn't look at her. "Yeah, I did." "Why?" I turned finally, meeting her gaze. "Because you're not a secret. And I don't bury things I plan to keep breathing." The words hung in the air, heavier than any vow. And when Anna reached for his hand this time, he didn't pull away. The world had, found its way back, but so had she. And Colt, he'd never once left. The days that followed were quiet, in all the ways Anna had never known before. No shouting, no slammed doors, no waiting for letters that never came. Just the wind moving through the pines and the rhythm of work that didn't ask for thanks, only presence. Colt didn't speak much, but she didn't need him to. His actions filled the silence. He chopped extra wood without being asked. He tacked new leather to her worn shoes. He rebuilt the back steps when he noticed her limping on the uneven ones. One morning, she found him reinforcing the roof with salvaged planks. "You expecting a storm?" she asked. "Always," he said, not looking down. But when he climbed off the ladder, his hand brushed hers longer than it needed to. That afternoon, she swept out the cabin while he worked by the creek. The space felt different now, lived in. She'd found wildflowers growing in the hollow and placed them in an old jar by the windowsill. She'd stitched curtains from an old feed sack. She even scrubbed the stove until it stopped looking like it belonged to a ghost. When Colt came in, he paused, his eyes sweeping over the room, over her. "You made it look like someone belongs here," he said. "Maybe someone finally does," she replied softly. That night, they shared stew and watched the fire crackle. Ruthless. Rain tapped the windows, but neither flinched. The cabin held. After a long pause, Anna said, "Do you ever think this place was waiting for someone?" "It was waiting for you," Colt said. She blinked. "You mean someone like me?" "No," he said, turning toward her fully. "You." Her chest ached with something, bright and terrifying. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that," she whispered. "You don't have to do anything with it," he replied. "Just stay long enough to believe it." She stared into the fire, the flames dancing like memories she didn't want to lose. "You didn't ask for this either," she said. "Didn't have to," he said. "Life gives what it gives. Sometimes it's a second chance wrapped in floodwater." He stood and held out a hand, not to lead her anywhere, not to pull her into something, but simply to say, "I'm here if you are." Anna placed her hand in his, rough fingers closing gently over hers. She rose, her steps steady, her heart no longer pacing behind her ribs. The cabin hadn't changed, but she had. And maybe that was enough to make it home. Anna found it by accident, a folded scrap of parchment tucked between the pages of her weather-worn Bible. She had written it weeks ago, the day she boarded the train, when hope still felt thin, but real. The words were smudged now, the ink having bled slightly in the storm, but the message was clear. To Grant Ellis, "I am coming with faith, though I've never seen your face. If you are kind, I will be too. If you are cruel, I will survive. My hands can work, and my heart has not yet given up. That's all I bring." She hadn't known then how little that would matter. Grant had died before she ever arrived, killed for, stealing a horse no less. But the letter still felt like a living piece of herself, a version of Anna who believed she had something to offer. She stared at the paper, feeling its fragility. Then Colt's voice cut through the quiet. "That yours?" She looked up, startled. He stood at the doorway, muddy boots in one hand, shoulders wet from morning work. "A letter," she said, "to a man who never read it." "You want to burn it?" She shook her head. "No. I want to remember who I was when I wrote it." Colt stepped closer, his eyes on her more than on the letter. "She's still here, you know. That woman." "Sometimes I wonder," Anna whispered, "if I've changed so much or if I've just finally stopped pretending." He reached out slowly, took the letter from her hands, and folded it again with care. Then he walked to the shelf above the hearth where she'd placed the wildflowers and a ceramic bowl. He set it there, tucked beneath a smooth stone. "Let it be a reminder," he said, "not of what you lost, but of what you've already survived." Anna swallowed hard. No one had ever spoken about her past like it was something brave, just something to be hidden, forgotten. She looked up at Colt. "What about you? Do you have something you never sent?" He thought for a long time, then said, "Yeah. My resignation. I was going to quit the Rangers. I never did. Just stopped showing up." "Why?" Colt's jaw tightened. "Because leaving meant admitting I couldn't save who I was supposed to. So I stayed in limbo instead." "And now?" she asked. "Now I think I found a reason to stop running from the man I've been and try being the one I want to be." Anna stepped close, touched his chest with the tips of her fingers. "Then let's start fresh. You and me. No letters. Just this." He nodded once. "This is enough." And in the soft flicker of the firelight, they both let go of the ghosts they'd carried, so they could finally start carrying each other. They'd expected another flood. The clouds had gathered for days, low, dark, heavy with threat, but the rain never came. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what Anna and Colt would become. That morning, she woke before dawn, wrapped in Colt's blanket, her head resting on the corner of his old armchair. He'd given her the bed again, but she had insisted on staying by the fire, needing its quiet glow more than comfort. When she stirred, Colt was already outside, splitting wood beneath the silver sky. His axe rose and fell like a heartbeat. She watched him through the window, the motion familiar now, constant, strong, and hers. They didn't speak much as the day unfolded. She made biscuits with the last of the flour, and he reinforced the barn door. But it wasn't silence born of distance. It was the quiet of people who had nothing left to prove. After supper, as twilight deepened and the wind settled into a low whisper, Colt brought out something she hadn't seen before. A bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Was going to give this to someone once," he said, placing it on the table. "Didn't get the chance." Anna unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a carved wooden pendant, simple and smooth, shaped like a feather. "It's a patch," he said. "Made it before I left the South Territory. A man gave it to me after I saved his son. Told me it meant silent protector. Figured it was for someone better than me." She looked up, her eyes searching his face. "Why now?" Colt shrugged. "Because maybe I'm not the man I was, and maybe you're the one it was meant for." Her throat tightened. "You think I'm a protector? You protect without needing a gun. You see what's broken and you fix it without complaint. That's more than I ever learned in all my years with the badge." Slowly, she lifted the pendant and tied the leather string around her neck. The feather rested just over her heart, light and certain. Outside, thunder rumbled once in the distance, but it faded, never reaching them. They stepped onto the porch together, watching the sky release its tension without a single drop falling. Colt's arm slipped around her waist, and she leaned into it like it was the most natural thing she'd ever done. "You think the storm's finally passed?" she asked. "No," Colt said, his voice soft against her temple. "But I think we're ready for it now." And as they stood in the fading light, two battered hearts side by side, they both knew that whatever weather came next, they wouldn't face it alone. Spring arrived like an apology, gentle breezes, wild flowers blooming stubbornly between stones and sunlight that warmed without burning. The mountains softened, the snow retreating to higher peaks, and the river, once a force of ruin, now flowed calm and clear. Anna stood at the edge of the pasture, one hand resting on the curve of her stomach. The child inside her shifted, a pipe-eyed reminder that time never stood still, not even in the quietest corners of the world. Behind her, the cabin stood proud, not grand, not large, but whole, fixed, alive. She turned as Colt emerged from the barn, brushing straw from his sleeves, his face flushed from work and something more tender. "Fence held through the thaw," he said. "Not bad for two people who had no business rebuilding anything." She smiled. "Speak for yourself. I've been rebuilding since the day I stepped off that train." He grinned, slow and genuine. "That's true. You just didn't know the cabin was part of it." They walked back together, his hand resting lightly at her back. Inside, the fire still crackled, though it was no longer needed. It had simply become part of the rhythm, like bread on the stove, like boots by the door, like love that didn't ask for attention, just showed up every day. That afternoon, they laid the last stone at the edge of the garden. It marked nothing official. No grave, no line. Just the place where Colt had first found her collapsed in the snow, where he had knelt down without a word and lifted her from the earth. "Should we name it?" she asked. "The garden? The stone?" He tilted his head. What would we call it? She thought for a moment. The place where I got back up. He nodded slowly. Good name. As dusk settled in, they sat on the porch, her hand wrapped in his, the child moving gently within her. Do you think I was meant to come here? She asked. No, Colt said. I think you survived your way here. That's stronger than fate. She rested her head on his shoulder. And you? I was just a man with an empty cabin. Didn't know how cold it was until you lit a fire I couldn't put out. The stars blinked to life overhead, quiet witnesses to the truth that didn't need to be spoken aloud. They had started with floodwater and silence, with bruises and bone-deep fear. But now there was peace. Not perfect, not easy, just earned. As the wind stirred the trees and the baby kicked against her ribs, Anna knew one thing with absolute certainty. The trail that had begun in grief had ended in grace, and this cabin, these arms, this life was home.